Hi, welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard with David Krayden. This is all part of the Krayden's Right channel experience. Hope you're going to enjoy today's episode because it's all about Trudeau's descent into political madness. So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Now, before I go on to why Trudeau's descending farther into political madness, I want to encourage you to support independent journalism. We're on the verge again of getting monetization. Believe me, it's a difficult process. More difficult than I would have ever imagined prior to beginning this. But I have invested a lot of time, energy, credibility into this exercise because I really believe it's going to be far nigh impossible to get the truth out, to get objective news out on the mainstream media. And we're going to have an internet crowded with propaganda. And we need to keep fighting Trudeau's censorship laws. So there are 3 of them, and the worst is yet to come. But please support this channel. Ring that bell. Subscribe. Become a member, because I do a lot more than this every week. We've got Take 5 sessions. We've got a lot of stuff. We bring you the clips that you might not, probably not going to see on the evening news or even on media outlets on the internet. So I think that's very important. But I want to move here to a story. I think it's probably the story of the week, and it continues to be because it has demonstrated the gulf in this country between the woke left and common sense, not just conservatives, but old-fashioned liberals and even some new Democrats who are wondering what in hell is going on with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And this story I wrote this week. It's a perfect example of that. Because what is Justin Trudeau is insisting that parents have no rights with regards to knowing if their children under 16 want to so-called transition, want to supposedly change their gender, want to use different pronouns. We're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-olds here. You don't think parents have a right to know about that? And that decision should be made by a child in conjunction with the school and the state? Well, that's what Justin Trudeau believes. This is my article. This is the tweet of the article. I was in the Post Millennial this week, and it demonstrated how there's, thank God, Blaine Higgs, Premier Blaine Higgs of New Brunswick, is saying no. He's not saying no to the whole transitional project, the LGBTQ project. He's just simply saying parents have a right to know. And I don't think anybody should really disagree with that. No matter if you think a 12-year-old child should have to be faced with this monument of sexuality, should have to grapple with these issues at that age, whether or not you think that's right or wrong, surely to goodness, you think a parent should know about it, because there are such things as parental rights. These are things that go back centuries. This is one of the cornerstones of Canadian democracy, of what we have inherited from the British parliamentary system. Parents, of course, have to have rights. Any other society where the state decides what your children do and what your children believe in, that's called a dictatorship. That's communist, or that's fascist, or that's Nazi. That's the kind of society where children don't have to tell their parents what they're doing because the state is looking after it.
Hello, Rainbow Railroad! Happy Pride season!
Right now, trans kids in New Brunswick are being told they don't have the right to be their true selves, that they need to ask permission. Well, trans kids need to feel safe, not targeted by politicians. We have to stand against this. We have to stand up for the freedoms we believe in and continue our work of letting love be louder than hate.
And Justin Trudeau, as usual, is lying, is distorting, is being mendacious about this, suggesting that this has something to do with human rights, that a child has a human right to withhold the truth from their parents. It's all about, and he has the gall to say it's politicians targeting children. He's the politician targeting children. So Premier Blaine Higgs, New Brunswick, is standing up to this. Who else? What else is happening? Well, I'll move to this one first. Because I tell you, the people in Canada don't agree with Justin Trudeau. Now, this was a national poll. 57% agree with New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs. Obviously, the 57% don't agree that Justin Trudeau thinks the state should decide about your children or that parents have no rights. 57%. That's quite phenomenal in a country that's been bombarded by Trudeau's LGBTQ propaganda, by Trudeau's constant stream of nonsense, his constant pressure, his constant distortion of the facts. That's quite a high number. And this is my Post Millennial story on that this week. Yeah, it was a busy week with the Post Millennial. Wonderful publication. It's one of the leading sources of new media in Canada and the US. They straddle the border. It's a cross-border media outlet, and the information is nonstop. It's rapid. It's going throughout the day, and it doesn't flinch. So I encourage you to read the Post Millennial. And I'm writing for it, as well as Human Events, which is its sister publication, which is another fantastic piece of information out there. I encourage you to read it. So what does all this mean? Is this having any impact on Justin Trudeau? All of this? Well, I would suggest it is. Because 81% of Canadians want to get rid of Trudeau. Now, that's a pretty stark number for this prime minister. I don't think he's running out of people who like him. 81% want political change in this country. And most of those who want political change are going to be voting conservative. Now, Pierre Poilievre has his faults, has his problems, has his own cowardice, but I tell you, he's going to be monumentally better than Justin Trudeau because he does have something called common sense. He doesn't really believe the carbon tax is going to prevent forest fires. Just look around you this summer. We've already had a carbon tax for years under Justin Trudeau. It didn't stop any forest fires, and putting 30 cents more a liter of tax every time you fill up is not going to stop any forest fires. And it's not a tax on pollution. It's a tax on people. That's what it is. So no wonder Justin Trudeau is plummeting, because people are beginning to say this guy is descending in the political madness. And it's really got to stop. And I'll tell you what else he did this week, which I really think is significant. So he goes over to Ukraine, in this surprise visit, right? Except there was no surprise. His people on the PMO had this planned, too many P's, had this planned for quite some time. He drops into Kiev and woof, he's greeted by all these Ukrainian officials, including a Holocaust denier, by the way. No problem. That only gets repeated maybe once in the mainstream media. I've only seen one story on that. Don't want to talk about that. That Trudeau is welcomed by a Holocaust denier. Somebody who said, Ukrainians had nothing to do with the Holocaust. Didn't shoot anybody. Which, of course, is a blatant, bald-faced lie. Of course they did. They actively participated in the Holocaust. Let's never forget that. Let's not honeycoat the Holocaust. Trudeau loves to pretend he's on the side of the underdog, but he's on the side of the elite. And when it comes to Ukraine, anything goes. So he drops into Kiev, and he's met by his bromance brother Volodymyr Zelensky. And they embrace in front of the Ukrainian legislature, in front of the palace. And it looks like, where did you come from, Mr. Trudeau? You dropped out of the sky. And of course, Justin has good news for this corrupt Zelensky, who is just panhandling around the world for billions of dollars, for your tax dollars, so he can allegedly finance his war. He's financing his war, yeah. Getting hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians killed in the cannon fodder of the front line, but he's also feathering his nest as well as the other Ukrainian oligarchs. They're taking this money, and we're being used as fools, just plain used. So Trudeau has another $500 million for Zelensky in Ukraine to foster the war. But here's the real news about this. What did Justin Trudeau also deliver to Zelensky while he's over there? Well, he says, we're going to be the guarantor of Ukrainian sovereignty. Now, have you ever heard this word used before in reference to another country? Well, it's pretty vague. That's the problem. We just had we just had a special rapporteur, and nobody had ever heard of that title again. Well, few people had. Yes, bureaucrats had. People familiar with some of the arcane operations of government understood that word. But very few people in the public knew what a special rapporteur is. Well, they don't know what a guarantor is either of another country's safety. And this is the problem. What does that mean? Canada is going to guarantee Ukraine's safety during its war with Russia. What's Canada going to do? Intervene militarily? Are we going to send troops to Ukraine to fight the Russians? Are we going to bomb Moscow? Are we going to send missiles across the border? Are we going to actively become a part of the war? How else do you guarantee that safety? Unless it's all blather. But that's the problem. Trudeau sounds serious about this. And you know what? He comes back to Canada. That story is in one mainstream media that I've seen. It's also on my Substack, but nobody's reporting on this. Nobody seems to think this is cause for concern, that Trudeau is guaranteeing Ukraine's safety. Believe me, this is how the First World War got started, because of alliance systems that people thought really didn't amount to very much, ended up causing Armageddon at the turn of the 20th century. It was catastrophic and devastating when it was all over. Countries were bankrupt. Communist regime had been started in Russia. Kingdoms had fallen. And the world was in complete fiscal disaster because of a war that only benefited the arms manufacturers. Nobody came out ahead in that war. And if we have a war with Russia right now, it could potentially become a thermonuclear war that is going to be disastrous and catastrophic for the world, if it still exists after it's all over. Because once you start a nuclear war, how do you end it? Because the impulse to retaliate, to get back for the damage the other side has caused you, is immense. And I come from a military background. My father was in the military. I spent most of my career in the Air Force. I'm not anti-war to the point of being a pacifist. I'm anti-war when it makes no sense. I'm anti-war when it's going to lead to a disaster, to Armageddon. I don't want a nuclear war any more than anybody else should. We used to know that. We used to remember that. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Even if you weren't there, you know it from your history. There was a profound concern that a nuclear war could erupt and end civilization as we knew it. Why is nobody in the mainstream media concerned about that today? That as we up the ante with Russia, as we increase the amounts of weapons we're sending to Ukraine, as we come closer and closer to actively putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, we are coming closer and closer to a nuclear war with Russia. We need to end this war, not to continue to finance it. It needs to end, because it is potentially going to lead to World War III. And that's a fact. And the opposition in this country is just as in bed with Zelensky and with Trudeau on this issue as the Republicans in the United States are. We got Lindsey Graham as the biggest warmonger. Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, supposedly a conservative, but he is the biggest warmonger in this debate south of the border. And I heard nothing this week from Pierre Poilievre or any of the conservatives about why Justin Trudeau is guaranteeing us to be Ukraine's guarantor. How are we going to do this? And why are we doing this? Not a single question in the House of Commons this week. But there was a bit of action. I'm going to show you that now. I think this is probably the best question of the week.
And overtaxation, the financial pressure on Canadians has become overwhelming. In my region and across Canada, Canadians are struggling. Our Atlantic premiers have been clear. They need relief and they need it now. Meanwhile, the government is busy doing their dastardly dance of disorder with the Davos Wonder class, amassing wealth and jet-setting around the world, all the while taxing the little guy for simply driving to work. When will this government stop fanning the flames of inflation and provide much-needed relief that Canadians are desperate for?
Yeah, good question. Now, I don't think I've heard a better enunciation of what the carbon tax is all about. See, what's happening here is that Trudeau jet sets around the world, creating a huge carbon footprint, but that's okay because he has to get the word out. And that's the same sort of nonsense we hear from the climate czar in the United States, John Kerry, a former presidential candidate, Mr. Heinz Ketchup. This is the guy who says he's got to use a private jet to travel around the world so he can get the word out about the dangers of climate change and how it's impending doom and how we only have less than a decade before it's all over due to climate change. Well, we might have less than a decade, but that might be because we're going to get into a nuclear war with Russia, thanks to the Democrats, Republicans, liberals, and to some extent the conservatives. But I tell you, the world is not going to end in 10 years because of climate change. That is all nonsense. But this guy, this conservative MP, really nails it here by saying it's all about these elites in Davos deciding your future, creating a climate tax that does nothing to stop climate change. And this carbon tax is just draining you dry. And not just at the gas pumps, but with your home heating and the effect it has on everything else. Everybody else who has to pay the carbon tax, so they push up the price of their products. I think that's probably the best question of the day. Yeah. Jet setting to climate change conferences while other people can't drive to work. That says everything about this Liberal government.
Action incentive that is actually providing thousands of dollars into the pockets of Canadians. So I think the real question that Canadians want to know is, what are the Conservatives planning to cut? What services, what benefits are they planning to cut that Canadians no longer have access to?
This is all that would be so easy to do. There's so much crap being generated by the Liberal government. So much unnecessary funding.
On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we believe in supporting Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Tobic Mactuquac.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are tired of this government's tepid tiptoeing through the tulips of political expediency with clear non-answers just displayed like that. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are financially battered, beaten, and broken, and are tired of being belittled. When will this government end the delays, the denials, and the deflection, and finally address the escalating dismay of being overlooked, overwhelmed, and overtaxed? Canadians are desperate for relief. When is it coming?
Now, that was a great rebuttal to a non-answer, of course. And you know what the Liberals are saying is, even though we've got the highest personal debt in the G7, even though mortgage rates continue to climb, and that has huge effects on people who have to refinance their homes, if they can. Even though all of these elements are rising and increasing the pain, don't worry. There's a grocery rebate coming in the mail. And the way Canada Post is operating these days, God help you, to get that rebate at all, because it is taking a long time to get the mail delivered these days. Have you noticed that? But anyway, that's a sidebar we can discuss another time. Canada Post is hopeless at getting the mail to your door anymore. But don't worry, the rebate check's in the mail, and that might help you to buy the eggs next week, but nothing else, because that's what the Liberals are all about. It's boutique government assistance. A little here, a little there, massive spending on projects, on ideology, on things that aren't going to do anything for you except annoy you. But in terms of changing things so that the grocery bill is lower, so you don't have to be subsidized by the government, nothing. They don't want to do that because they want to keep spending at prolific rates. That's what this government is all about, quite simply. And to give you a stipend every month to offset the crushing blow of inflationary prices at the grocery store, frankly, is just pathetic. It's not going to work. But that's the talking point. Every time you say, my God, Canadians can't cope with the cost of living, don't worry, there's a grocery rebate in the mail, and we're doing so much for Canadians. That's why everybody's living off the credit cards these days. Now, that is a fact, and you know that as well as I do. If you're not living off your credit card, you have friends and family that are, because their savings are being eaten up, and the paycheck is not going far enough to pay for the basics anymore. Now, we'll get to one of the other issues this week, which is that incredible misfit of a minister, Mendocino. And just watch this.
His staff under the bus. His office admits that they found out on March the 2nd, 3 months before the minister claimed to be shocked by the news. If his staff had really kept a secret from him of this enormity, he would have fired them a long time ago. But he hasn't, because he knows, and they know, that he knew way back then. So will he do the only honorable thing that is left for him to do and resign?
You've got lots to resign for.
Mr. Speaker, I invite the leader of the Conservative Party to repeat that allegation outside of the House. I will absolutely reject it. I knew.
All right, here we go. Marco pointing his finger. He invites Pierre Poilievre to repeat that outside the House, like he is such a man of conviction and honesty. He's outraged somebody would question his basic integrity. But of course, this is all crap. He's already been shown to have lied on other files. He lied about the imposition of the Emergencies Act, which he still defends like he was doing us a favor by crushing all political opposition to the Liberal Party. He denied that there were Chinese police stations operating in Canada. They still are. And now he's saying he knew nothing about removing Paul Bernardo from a maximum to a medium security prison. This is the guy, the public safety minister, who's in charge of the cops. He's supposed to know everything that's happening, especially with a high-profile sex offender and killer like Paul Bernardo. But he claims he knew nothing. Just they wouldn't tell him. And somebody in his staff must have known, but they didn't tell him either. And he's not saying whether or not that staff member even really exists, or if he's going to fire that person. Because if he fires somebody, it's all he's doing is sacrificing somebody under the bus for his own stupidity and incompetence. And now he's obviously not telling the truth again. Let's hear the end of this.
On May 30th.
A little bit of drama here. Of course, Mendocino is always being asked to resign.
Order.
It's kind of like saying hello and goodbye to him.
Members to take a deep breath. I know some of the topics we discuss in here are very emotional and we get carried away, but I'm going to ask everyone to take a deep breath and allow the minister to answer so that the honourable member of the leader of the opposition can hear the answer. The honourable minister, please continue. You have 22 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, it is the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada who misleads this House when he impugns my knowledge before May 30th. I had made it absolutely clear that that was the day on which I found out. I have taken corrective steps internally with my office, an office for which I am responsible for, to this Parliament, to the Canadian public, which is why immediately upon knowing that fact that he was transferred to a medium security institution, I raised it with the Commissioner. I've spoken with the representatives of the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, and we will always defend.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
You have to admit, he does his best to put a happy face on a pretty sad situation. But Mendocino is just really a piece of baggage in his cabinet. And it's embarrassing to listen to him stand up repeatedly that day and try to defend himself, try to defend his actions, and try to pretend he somehow knew nothing until the end of May. It's really appalling. But let's hear the end of this, because it really is worth listening to.
Position.
Well, first of all, I have stated all of these things outside of the House of Commons, so whatever threat he's trying to make, he can act on. But more important than that, he did not act. His office knew on March the 2nd. He expects us to believe that his staff just forgot to walk down the hall and inform him that perhaps the most notorious killer in Canadian history was being moved out of a maximum security penitentiary to enjoy more luxuries and more freedoms in a medium security penitentiary. Finally, he has the power now to designate mass murderers all to go into maximum security prisons. He could have done that weeks ago. Why hasn't he done it? And why hasn't he
I hope you're enjoying this. Yes. And of course, no. Yeah. He came back with the same talking points, the same claim, the same lies. And this guy is really just an utter mockery of good government and good governance. And will he resign? Of course not, because Justin Trudeau only throws female cabinet ministers under the bus. Jody Wilson-Raybould comes to mind. And actually, Calgary Member of Parliament Michelle Rempel-Garner pointed that out this week, that the only ministers Trudeau is prepared to sever from his cabinet are females. And that's quite a telling statement, very true statement. So, as we get to the end here, I want to encourage you again to support this broadcast, support what I'm doing, because I'm doing this for you viewers and listeners. And I think it's important I continue to do this. I write for new media. I write on Substack. But this is a component of my outreach, my journalistic outreach. I've been doing this for over 30 years as a journalist, as an Air Force public affairs officer, as somebody who knows the media, who knows Ottawa intimately, and doesn't trust it, and never will. And I tell you, I'm in nobody's political pocket. No political party is ever going to buy my opinion. And I will call them as I see it every time. And I think I give that promise and that guarantee to you. So please ring that bell, subscribe, become a part of this. This is an experience. And I want this experience